So, Donald Trump is back in the news, and this time it's about economics. This week he rolled out one of the most aggressive tariff packages in recent memory, a baseline 10% tariffs on all imports into the United States, with higher rates for certain other countries. China was hit with 34%, the EU with 20%, Japan and India also got higher tariffs. My country, United Kingdom, was slapped with the base 10% tariff. Nearly the entire world made this tariff list, except Russia, along with Cuba, Belarus, and North Korea. Yeah, along with those three, Russia was excluded from this tariff hike. And if you're in Russia, like I am, that might sound like pretty good news. No new tariffs means no direct hit to Russian exports, and that's great, right? Well, not so fast. I'm currently sat in my local park here in Moscow. It's called the Fortovo Park here on a chilly April evening. It's like almost 6 p.m. now. You can see people behind me in coats and stuff. It's about 5 degrees. I decided to take the plunge and talk about something I actually rarely speak about here, which is current affairs. In this case, I want to talk about economics. Not international economics as such, but really focusing on how it affects Russia. Because while Russia isn't actually facing direct tariffs from the United States, that doesn't mean it's not massively affected. In fact, the consequences on the US of the US tariffs on Russia could still be incredibly serious. It's just less immediate, less obvious for everyone, and it's way more long term. So to understand why this is happening, first we need to zoom out, because this isn't Trump's first tariff war. Actually, back in 2018, you might remember he went and slapped tariffs on China, on steel and aluminium from Europe, and he framed this all as protection for American jobs and American industry. And now we're seeing this exact same playbook, but of course on a much bigger scale. This time, nearly everyone's included. It's classic Donald Trump. It's attention-grabbing, it's populist, and it's very focused on international trade imbalances, which is one of his pet topics. I have my own personal opinions about how effective these tariffs will be for working American people, and if they're a good thing for the United States as a whole, but I'm going to refrain from talking about that. I'm living in Russia, so I've been here for 8 years, so my focus is really about how Russia is affected. And if you're American, I would be keen to hear your opinions in the comments about how you think it's going to affect your country. On Russia, the US Treasury actually says that the country was left out of the tariff list because there's no meaningful trade left to target, and that's a quote. And that does check out. In 2021, US-Russia trade was around $35 billion. By 2024, it had dropped to 10% of that, just $3.5 billion. Sanctions already did most of the work that tariffs would do. So from Washington's perspective, according to the Trump administration, there's no need to bother putting more tariffs on. But here's the catch, the thing I really want to talk about. Tariffs on this scale don't just affect the countries they're directly aimed at, because they send ripples through the entire global economy. Markets react, supply chains shift, and commodity prices wobble, and investors who are always allergic to uncertainty, they start pulling out of riskier assets, and that's where Russia gets caught up here. And we've already seen it in the last few days. Directly after Trump's announcement of tariffs, oil prices dipped. The Moscow exchange slid. Shares in huge Russian companies like Gazprom, Rosneft, Sberbank, they all lost value, and the Russian ruble slipped too. Not really against the dollar, but against the Chinese yuan. This is all happening despite Russia not being directly targeted by these sanctions, by these tariffs rather. And the reason is incredibly simple, because even under heavy sanctions like Russia is, like it has been for years, the country's economy is still massively tied to global demand. It lives off exports. Oil, gas, metals, fertilizer, grain. When global trade slows, prices fall. When prices fall, revenue shrinks, and for Russia that's a problem. Because the global economy is like a spider web. You just pull on one part of the spider web and the whole thing starts shaking. Same for the economy. But that said, it's not all bad news, because there are areas where Russia could see short-term advantages, and I want to talk about that as well. Take China, for example. As China retaliates against US tariffs, it may need to replace some of its American imports, and that could mean more demand for Russian stuff, wheat, fertilizer, and natural gas in particular, especially via the Power of Siberia gas pipeline. So companies like Fosagro, Uralchem, Novatek could find new contracts in China. Gold prices have also risen, and that benefits Russian miners, especially during times of economic anxiety. People like to buy gold. That helps gold mining companies. It's not like incredibly transformative, but in a tough climate, it can give a modest uptick, and any modest uptick can really matter. And in fairness to Moscow, Russia really has spent the last few years really preparing for this kind of instability. Parallel import systems have been in place for a while now. Trade ties with China, India, Turkey, Central Asia, they're stronger than ever. Infrastructure projects like the Power of Siberia 2 and the International North-South Transport Corridor are all part of Russia's already ongoing broader pivot eastwards. So it's not smooth sailing by any means, but the groundwork for this has already been laid for years. Still, let's not overhype the potential upside here for Russia, because China's never going to solely rely on Russia. It has loads of other suppliers from all over the world, Latin America, Southeast Asia, even domestically. And Russia export infrastructure does have limits. You can't just flip a switch and overnight, boom, double pipeline capacity, because logistics really matter here. Geography, of course, matters. And in this case, timing matters. So at best for the Russian economy, we're looking at some selective gains here, not a full-scale overnight shift in global trade. Meanwhile, the risks for Russia are real. Tariffs could drive up global prices, spark inflation, and push central banks, including the US Federal Reserve, to raise interest rates. And that strengthens the US dollar. That makes life harder for countries that don't use the US dollar so prominently, like Russia. A weaker ruble would mean costlier imports, a tougher debt repayments, and pressure on everyday goods and their prices. And Russia's central bank, in this case, is actually pretty stuck. If it raises rates, it could choke growth. If it cuts them, inflation could spike. So the central bank here in Russia doesn't have a lot of room for maneuver. Now, to be fair, Russia does have a lot of built-up resilience over the years, because this is not new territory for Russia. The economy has been under serious Western sanctions since 2014, and the pressure has only intensified after 2022. So, in response, over these years, Russia has developed some workarounds. Domestic payment systems being one, import substitution, increased trade with Asia, the Middle East, alternatives to things like SWIFT. So in many ways, the Russian economy has really been stress tested more than most. And that's helped the country and its financial institutions develop a kind of institutional toughness. They have a sense of how to function under severe pressure, how to adapt, how to constantly keep things moving. But of course, that doesn't make Russia immune. Not at all. The country still has some critical vulnerabilities here economically, especially in high-tech industries, finance, logistics. And while Russia has reorientated a lot of its trade eastwards, it still can't really 100% replace what was lost from imports from the West and exports to the West, not in scale, not in income, certainly not in reliability. But the economy is more resilient than it was, but far from invincible. And if this all spirals into a broader global downturn, a recession, which it very well could do, then things could actually start looking fairly bleak for the Russian economy. Falling demand for oil, gas, metals, timber, Russian chemicals, that would mean less export revenue, a wider budget deficit, more strain on federal finances. And let's not forget, Russia has things it really needs to continue really funding a lot. Social support needs to be maintained. People in this country demand results from the government. So, apologies. Some people say that this could push BRICS countries like China and India closer to Russia, building deeper parallel trade systems that ignore Western restrictions. And yes, we all know that this trend has actually slowly been happening over the last few years. We've seen more one ruble transactions, more barter-style deals internationally, more regional trade forums, with the West not having a seat at the table. But again, Russia should be cautiously optimistic here. Most countries do still want access to Western markets, to dollars, to stable banking, and they're not going to jeopardize that unless they really have to. And right now, my personal assessment is they don't have to, not yet at least. So, how does this all play out for what's more important to me? People in Russia. Not just for the markets, but for daily life, for me, my family, my friends. Well, if global demand stays soft and oil prices don't recover quickly, then the ruble could stay under pressure. That means higher prices for imported goods, from electronics to cars to medicines. It could mean fewer new investments or investments in infrastructure or social programs. Private sector wages might even stagnate. Some jobs could disappear altogether. So I would basically define this now as not a crisis exactly, but a headwind. On the flip side, let's talk about positives again. Domestic industry here could get a bit of breathing room. Russian manufacturers, especially in the agriculture sector and light industry, could seriously benefit from having less foreign competition in some areas. There's actually real potential for some smart policy here from the Kremlin. And if the Kremlin plays it right, and I think it could, this could be actually a chance to build up local production, make the Russian economy a little more self-sufficient. Of course, not isolated. It can't live isolated, but even more resilient than it currently is. So if you bring it back to the big question here, how will Trump's tariffs affect Russia? Not with a direct blow. Through massive global turbulence, falling commodity prices, nervous investors, shifting trade flows, and tighter financial conditions, but not a direct blow, because Russia didn't make the tariff list. It didn't get hit by the earthquake, but it's still feeling the tremors from a distance. And for Russia, really the good news is that this is not the first time. And unlike in 2014 or even 2022, Russia isn't flying blind here. It's learned a lot of lessons economically. Lots of new systems are in place. There are still huge challenges for the Russian economy, but also a number of opportunities that, if the Kremlin handles this moment wisely, could be good for the country. So, in conclusion, I just want to say, if you found this breakdown useful, please give it a like, drop me a comment, and let me know if you'd like to hear more deep dives like this about politics or economics in Russia. If you're outside Russia, I'd love to hear from you how these tariffs are being talked about, where you come from. I love to hear other people's opinions. This is not a channel of me pontificating. I like to hear and learn. So thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Thank you for watching this video. If you'd like more content, early access to my videos, or simply want to support my work, please consider joining as a member here on YouTube. There's an early access video waiting for you right now. Plus, if you join at the higher membership tier, I'll personally thank you by reading your name out loud in every single one of my videos. If you prefer Patreon, that's an alternative for those who like that platform or for viewers in countries where YouTube memberships aren't available. The perks there are exactly the same as YouTube, just on a different platform. No need to sign up for both, just choose whichever works best for you. For those who just want to make a one-time donation with no monthly commitment, you can support me too through my Buy Me a Coffee link. That link is in the description to this video, and any support is greatly appreciated. If you're in Russia or you're unable to use Western bank cards, I also have a Boosty account. There you'll get the same extra content and early access as on YouTube and Patreon, but with the option to pay in rubles. The Boosty link is in the description to this video. Thank you very much.